Michael had enough grassroots support to win the 1976 election, but the crisis still deepened. Foreign businesses found more friendly places to invest their money.
They frightened away every foreign investor that we had, and a lot of local investors at the same time, because they were threatened. They were told that they were not the sort of people that were not wanted here, that Jamaica was going to be a socialist country, and that the capitalist was no longer welcome. America was called a wicked imperialist capitalist nation and exploiter, and the whole ambience of the place was very frightening to any kind of investment.
Of greater concern, the urban poor were losing patience. Michael Manley had no choice but to bow to US pressure as his socialist dream of a free, equal, independent Jamaica crumbled before his eyes. He went to the World Bank and effectively handed over the running of the country to the IMF. Jamaica's future would now be in the hands of foreigners.
He was, sort of proud person who felt that although your country was small, that you had rights like everybody else. And I think he realized the extent to which these rights were going to be withdrawn.
Less than 20 years of independence had brought the island back to financial slavery. The IMF loan of 29 million was not enough and came with strings attached, which put an end to social reforms and led to shortages.
We can't get oil, we can't get detergent, we can't get flour, we can't get rice. Well, everything on a whole you can't get.
For some crazy reason I chose to have a baby in that 1980 election year, and he was premature. He was in the hospital for about 3 weeks in the intensive care unit at the hospital for premature babies. And I was able to interact with working class mothers on a day-to-day basis. They'd all come, we'd all come to visit baby and our babies, and we talked. And one of the things we talked about was the shortage of foodstuff.
I saw people who were willing to die just to free Jamaica at that time, because the people felt that they were in bondage. There are people who left Jamaica, who died abroad, very, very unhappy and very sad. There are people who still live abroad who swear they'd never come back to Jamaica because it was such a bad experience for them. It was a downfall. I'm telling you, it was a period where people hated him. They really hated him.
First of all, you go to the private banking system and you see, well, can I get a private banking loan? Because I'm strapped for cash, I need some support, and I'm having trouble paying my overseas bills.
When the private banks won't lend to you, then you've got to do something if you're leader of a country. And typically what you've got to do is to cut back your spending in some way and try and get more money so that the impact of those cutbacks are not as severe as they otherwise would be. And it's at that point that you generally come to the IMF.
What you really need is to sit down with them and say, look, can I work out a 5-year program? And in the meantime, I'm strapped for some cash, so can you help me up front to get out of the cash bind and then put it in the context of a long-term development plan? And they say, no, long-term development is your problem. We are here only to see who do you owe the money to, why are you in a bind, and we'll lend you some money in a very short time frame at full interest rate to get you out of the bind. And they then impose upon you tremendous restrictions in what you can spend.
When we reach agreement on set of measures on the budget, on the exchange rate, on monetary policy, on interest rates, on banks, on maybe privatization, and say, look, we think this could solve your problem.
And you say to them, but if I do it that way, when I finish repaying you, I'm going to need the band all over, because this can't solve my problem. This is not our problem.
The whole idea was to set conditions which the government could not meet. And when the government failed to meet them, you would have to renegotiate a new loan in which the conditions became tighter. So the IMF didn't say, cut out this education program or cut out this health program. What the IMF said is, you must spend only so much money on health and education. And the implication of that was that you had to cut out some programs.
Essentially what the IMF wanted us to do was to devalue our currency. That's the first thing, to make our dollar cheaper.
They needed to expand their exports and diminish their imports. And the best way of doing that is to make foreign currency more expensive.
And since our society is so heavily dependent on imported food, imported fuel, imported books to go to school, imported medicine, when we devalue, the cost of those things we import go up to the citizens. And as a result, the economy today is much more under the control of foreigners, not necessarily through direct ownership, but through the mechanism of debt. In the 1970s, we owed $800 million. By the end of the 1980s, we owed $4 billion. Nowadays, we owe $7 billion. So the debt is rising, and all the time the debt is rising, our capacity to export, to produce, is getting less.
The CIA would look upon the radical political content of reggae music as dangerous because it would help to create a consciousness among poor people, among the great majority of Jamaicans. By the mid-70s, the streets of Kingston reflected all the anger and discontent of the Jamaican people. Their politicians had failed to deliver the promised fruits of independence.
This interview, tell us a little bit about Lewis Wolf and his journalistic publications. Who is Lewis and what has he been doing over the years, and why is the government so outraged by him?
Well, his background is it's thoroughly legitimate, standard, if you will, journalism. He was assigned for a couple of years in Manchester, writing for, and we did a great deal of research into that, and we discovered in many ways a very similar program, almost a classic model that was followed along the lines of what they did in Chile, including three major categories: military, paramilitary activity, the use of propaganda in the media, and the third one, which was economic warfare, using the multilateral organizations, the International Monetary Fund and others, to withhold loans which had been promised to the Jamaican government. This is one example.
What are a couple more of the details of that? You particularly mentioned those first two examples of actual paramilitary activity the CIA was involved in Jamaica.
There was a fire, for example, that took place in Jamaica of an old people's home. I think 150 old and infirmed women, many of them blind, were living in this home. And as it turned out, the place burned down in the space of about 8 minutes, 7 or 8 minutes. It was discovered that the phone wires had been cut and that their exits had all been blocked. Even those who could see their way out could not get out. And that the means by which the fire was set was the use of a petroleum jelly, which was unavailable in Jamaica. This was one indication, among others, that there was outside help. Why would the CIA, you might ask, why would the CIA want to murder 150 old women? It was because it was an effort, part of a very large-scale effort to discredit the government in Jamaica, which was at the time headed by Michael Manley, the Prime Minister. There were images produced of Michael Manley in the media, in the Daily Gleaner, which was the newspaper which the United States, through the CIA, helped to support. And there is a good deal of evidence of that. There were images of Michael Manley showing a death mask. I mean, it was his face which had been
somehow made to look like a death mask, although it was pretending to be a photograph of him. And there were many ways to try and discredit him. This is very, very similar, in fact, to what the CIA did to try and discredit Salvador Allende in Chile. If you remember, Richard Nixon instructed the CIA in a meeting which was in 1970 in the White House, and there was a document in the Senate report which is reprinted, and he said, "Make the economy scream." Those were his words. And that's, of course, what the CIA proceeded to do in Chile, and that's what they also did in Jamaica.
They also furnished a lot of munitions and assistance to the terrorist squads that were going around killing people in those cities and also in the countryside in Jamaica as well.
That's correct.
Well, John, you had a trip down to Jamaica, and you saw a lot of these things about Jamaica